Let me introduce our second featured reader, Joseph Fasano, who is an American poet, novelist, and songwriter. His novels include The Swallows of Lunetto by Magdalen House in 2022 and The Dark Heart of Every Wild Thing by Platypus Press in 2020. His books of poetry include The Last Song of the World, which is forthcoming by Boa Edition in 2024, The Crossing in 2018, Vincent in 2015, Inheritance 2014, and Fugue for Other Hands in 2013. His honors include the Cider Press Review Book Award, the Rattle Poetry Prize, and the Worldview Prize from the Poetry Archive. The Magic Words, his book of poetry prompts for people of all ages, is forthcoming from Penguin Random House in March of 2024. And you can find his prompts, poems, and daily poetry thread on Twitter X at Joseph_Fasano_. And also, Joseph, a reflection for you about your work. So the first words that come to mind for me as I read your poems are kindness and a deep observation that sees beyond the superficial truth of things. A poetry that urges you to listen, for war is made by those who hear no birds, after all. And a poetry that is also well aware of our and maybe even its own capacity for violence. Adam Zagajewski wrote a poem called Try to Praise the Mutilated World, and to me that is exactly what your poems are doing. And in that I find a deep wisdom in your poetry. And also a kind of inscrutable mechanism that will not reveal its secrets no matter how often I turn it and try to look at it from another way. Direct and yet not, in all senses a story in which what is happening is not what is happening. And so, Joseph, I have the same question for you based on Louis Gluck's line, at the end of my suffering, there was a door. And I also wonder, what kind of door is poetry for you, or what does that door lead into?
First of all, thank you. How wonderful it is to hear such a generous reading and understanding of what I wake up in the morning and try to do, and how wonderful it is to share this duo together. Those were such rich, astonishing poems that we just heard. The great philosopher Heraclitus once said, "The way up and the way down are the same," a rather cryptic remark that T.S. Eliot used as one of his epigraphs for the four quartets. And I often, as a poet, modify that slightly and say the way in and the way out are the same. And so I love the reflection earlier on poetry being a door into oneself, and I certainly think that's true. But there's that great faith that we have in all works of art, which is if we go deep enough into ourselves, we will not find solipsism, isolation, but we will find the other. And I often reflect on the fact that that great American poem, Song of Myself by Whitman, begins with the word I. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume, you shall assume. And all those thousands of lines later, it ends with the word you. And I think that's the gesture of lyric poetry, and I think that's the door that we hope to walk into. So it's a great question, and it's been fun to reflect on that. I thank you for it.
And thank you for that wonderful reflection. That really makes my mind already spinning, well, in a good way, spinning. So please take us into your poetry.
Sure, thank you. I will share just a few poems this evening, and I will start with a short poem that I believe is my shortest published poem. But short poems have a way of being the tip of an iceberg that took many, many years to create, whatever the virtue of the poem might be. And this is a tiny poem called Sudden Hymn in Winter. What if, after years of trial, a love should come and lay a hand upon you and say, this late, your life is not a crime. Some of my poems lately have been coming from occasions that happen. I spend a lot of time with my students, and my students often pose these questions or these moral dilemmas that I take very seriously. I think it's so important to listen to what they have to say. And so I've written a poem I won't be sharing tonight, for example, for a young student who had used artificial intelligence to write a paper. And I think it was important for me to start out that poem with sort of the words, I know, I understand. And not to start from a place of judgment, but to see, where these dilemmas, these complex dilemmas are coming from. So this is for a student who said reading poetry is a waste of time in a world at war. I know. I know we have no words now, no way to begin to praise this world. Lie still when you leave here in the shadows. The wind just might be children in the willows. All you have to do today is listen. Wars are made by those who hear no birds. I very rarely do readings that are thematic, I suppose, in nature, but of course I'm thinking about all the things happening in the world right now. As a relatively new father, I think about them a great deal. And this is I have been haunted lately by these sorts of dream voices that seem to be the human voice speaking from the other side of destruction. What would happen if we carried this to its logical end or its illogical end? And I keep waking up in the morning in this half hypnagogic state and hearing these human voices as though they're speaking from the ruin of what would happen if we did not stop the chain of destruction. And so this is a poem called Words Found in the Rubble After the Final War. Yes, we lived in a time of darkness and did nothing. Yes, we looked up and we saw the sky on fire, and we knew that we had made the flames with our own hands. Yes, we wasted every breath on rage. Children, if any of you have survived this, start again with the simplest things. We beg you. Walk out through the garden of the darkness and touch each other's faces in the morning air. Slowly, slowly, say each other's names. And I will just read two more poems. And Mila, I'm so glad that one of the things you said about my work is that that it does try, I hope, to listen. And I think that the listening is real. I always say to my students, the life of an artist is no different from any life, which is an attempt to constantly become a better listener to yourself, to others, to the world. And so this is, when we feel powerless, when we feel that there are people suffering in the world, whether they be people we know, people we don't know, and there's the question of how we can help them. And I started to think of the healers, people playing the role of healing in a world where indeed there continues to be, as there always has been, much destruction. So this is a little poem called The Healers, and then I'll read one more after this. The Healers. You can hear them moving among the ruins, hear them by their silence in the noisy crowds. You can see them opening their little bags, opening the shrapneled hearts of strangers, crouching before the body of a child to lean down and whisper her a story in which what's happening is not what's happening. They mend, they stitch, they carry, they work, they weep, they lose. And when nothing can be done among the rubble, they kneel there as the fires fall around them, and they cradle the face of the dying, the life that is trying to speak to them, the life that whispers, listen, and they do. I'm going to finally share a poem with you that I wrote I suppose it's some weeks ago now, again, in clear response to the slaughter of innocent people that's happening around the world. And I must say that I shared this poem. I didn't even think to put my name on it. I didn't think it really mattered that it was by anyone in particular. And I shared this poem, and it made its way around the world, and I was very glad to hear that. But I have not been able to read it aloud a single time. And part of that, I must say, is that every time I tried to read it aloud, it was as though I felt I had no right to say it. This is a poem called "Words Whispered to a Child Under Siege," and it's a poem in the voice of a parent trying to lie to and comfort a child in a world that is being destroyed. And finally, I thought this evening I would share it with you because I was having a conversation with a student of mine, and she said to me, "Every time I try to write about somebody else's suffering, I'm told I can't do that." And I thought, we've really lost ourselves. It's right, it's very right, I think, to have conversations about what it means to imagine yourself into the life of another. But we cannot tell our next generation of poets that this is off limits. It is the fundamental gesture of compassion. It's the fundamental gesture of art. I often try to account for why that happens at times, why we draw limits around the imagination. It may start in a place of virtue, but it ends in a place of a simple internalization of our culture of commodification. This is my pain, this is your pain, and all that does is separate us further. So this is a poem that is not meant to speak for or to any particular group of people. I always say that when I want to say that. This is to speak for our species. And I want you to imagine yourself into that situation, as I've tried to do, as impossible as it is. And I'll end with this. Words whispered to a child under siege. No, we are not going to die. The sounds you hear knocking the windows and chipping the paint from the ceiling, that is a game the world is playing. Our task is to crouch in the dark as long as we can and count the beats of our own hearts. Good, like that. Lay your hand on my heart and I'll lay mine on yours. Which one of us wins is the one who loves the game the most while it lasts. Yes, it is going to last. You can use your ear instead of your hand here on my heart. Why is it beating faster? For you, that's all. I always wanted you to be born, and so did the world. No, those aren't a stranger's footsteps in the house. Yes, I'm here. We're safe. Remember chess. Remember hide and seek. The song your mother sang. Let's sing that one. She's still with us, yes, but you have to sing without making a sound. She'd like that. No, those aren't bootsteps. Sing, sing louder. Those aren't bootsteps. Let me show you how I cried when you were born. Those aren't bootsteps. Those aren't sirens. Those aren't flames. Close your eyes. Like chess. Like hide and seek. When the game is done, you get another life. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for an amazing and touching reading.